My stepmother had a big, expensive birthday cake ready for my cousin because she was supposed to be the star of the night. Along with it, they gifted her a brand new car. They had never celebrated my birthday in 25 years and never even noticed my poor condition. I was still driving a scooty while they showered her with luxury. They toasted to her future while I sat back, smiling. Soon they'd realize who really won the night. The air in the room was thick with the buzz of laughter, clinking glasses, and the unmistakable sound of a life that didn't belong to me unfolding before my eyes. It was Jessica's birthday, and there I was, the lone figure in the corner as always. My cousin, the golden child, sat at the center of it all. Linda, my stepmother, looked at her with adoration that could have been mistaken for worship. Every word of praise she spoke was a dagger to my chest, but I stood there, still pretending not to care. The enormous birthday cake gleamed under the lights, layers of frosting and colorful decorations that spoke of a celebration meant to draw attention. It was as if Jessica herself was the star of some grand performance, and Linda was the proud stage manager, ensuring every detail was perfect. The kind of attention I had never received. As I sipped my drink and stared at the festivities, I couldn't help but feel small, unnoticed, and invisible. I should have been happy for Jessica, but the truth was, it hurt. It hurt more than I cared to admit, especially when I knew deep down that I was always going to be the backdrop to her brilliance. I could feel the cold weight of my worn-out scooty lingering in my mind, parked just outside their beautiful home. The same scooty I had been riding for years, while they lived in their bubble of perfection. My life was nowhere near the extravagance they lived, nor did they ever seem to notice how much I worked just to make ends meet. Their world was a fast lane, while I was stuck on the side, watching as the wheels of their privileged lives sped ahead. The juxtaposition was stark. Jessica in her glamorous dress, sparkling with attention, and me fading into the background, a forgotten character in a scene I was never meant to star in. I couldn't escape it. The grand party that seemed to celebrate her existence reinforced the bitter truth I had been carrying for years. Linda and Jack, my father, only saw what they wanted to see. They saw Jessica as the daughter who was everything they had ever dreamed of. Perfect, obedient, and loved. I was just a filler in their lives. Someone who showed up, worked hard, and did what was expected without ever being acknowledged. I had become invisible in a room full of noise and excitement. The tension was unbearable. As Linda presented Jessica with the new car, my stomach churned. The car, wrapped in a bright red bow, was the kind of gift that screamed, "You've made it." A gift so extravagant that it made the fact that I still had a rusting old scooter feel like a cruel joke. I smiled, but the smile felt hollow. It wasn't jealousy. No, not at all. It was something deeper, something darker. The crushing realization that my life, despite all my efforts, had no place in their story. I wasn't seen for who I was, for what I had achieved. All they saw was Jessica, the perfect one, the one who could do no wrong. My accomplishments, no matter how small or significant, went unnoticed. And that was the moment I broke. The tipping point wasn't just about the car. It was about everything leading up to this point. The years of doing what was expected of me, working hard in silence, and always being overshadowed by Jessica's every move. I had spent my entire life as a backdrop to her success. Her perfect grades, her flawless skin, her sparkling personality. She was everything I was not, and I could never escape it. And that night I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let myself fade into the background while everyone else thrived in their perfect little world. I left the party early, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. As I drove home, the darkness of the night seemed to match the turmoil inside me. The wind slapped against my face as I gripped the handlebars of my scooter, the same one I had been riding for years. I had become so accustomed to being second best, to playing a role that I never wanted, that I had almost accepted it. But tonight something had shifted. I realized that I wasn't just resentful. I was angry. Angry at myself for not seeing my own worth, and angry at them for never acknowledging it. But most of all, I was angry that I had let them define who I was for so long. By the time I reached my small apartment, my thoughts were racing. I couldn't shake the image of Jessica sitting in her new car, smiling as if everything she had was deserved. What about me? What had I done to deserve a fraction of that attention? What had I worked for? It wasn't about gifts or praise. It was about respect. It was about being seen for the effort I put into everything I did. I wasn't asking for a gold-plated car or a lavish birthday cake. I was asking for recognition. That night, alone in my room, I let myself reflect. It wasn't just about the party or the car. It was about a lifetime of being overshadowed by someone who, in all fairness, was everything I couldn't be. I was never going to be Jessica. I was never going to fit into the mold they wanted me to. But maybe that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I had let myself believe I was less than enough, simply because I didn't meet their expectations. They had never truly seen me, not for who I was or what I had accomplished. They only saw what I wasn't, and I had let that shape my entire life. I had never considered that maybe it was time to see myself differently. I had lived my entire life in the shadow of their praise for Jessica, but I had never asked myself what I truly wanted. No one was going to hand me the validation I was so desperately seeking. No one was going to change how they saw me until I changed how I saw myself. I needed to do something for me, not for anyone else. And that was the first moment I realized that maybe the answer had been right in front of me all along. This town, my home, the very place I had been trying to escape for so long. The next morning, still carrying the weight of the previous night's realization, I went for a walk. The town, small as it was, had always seemed like a place full of untapped potential. I'd never really looked at it with the eyes of someone who could transform it. But now everything seemed different. The green fields stretched for miles, the untouched woods whispered secrets, and the calm river reflected the sky like a mirror. There was something here, something I had never noticed before. This town wasn't just my home, it was an opportunity. I thought back to a trip I had taken a few years ago to a nearby city. They had turned their natural beauty into a booming ecotourism business. It had struck me then how much potential was sitting right under our noses, waiting to be recognized. If I could turn the town's untouched landscapes into a destination for people looking for an escape, maybe, just maybe, I could change everything. That night, I sat down in my small apartment, alone and determined. I grabbed a pen and began to write. The idea started small, but as I jotted down my thoughts, it grew. I could turn the town into a hub for sustainable tourism, focusing on nature walks, hiking tours, and farm stays. A place where people could get away from the noise of the world and reconnect with nature. It wasn't just a pipe dream. It was my chance. My chance to show everyone, including myself, that I could make something of this town. I wasn't going to get validation from my family. Not the way I wanted it. But maybe I could create something bigger than all of us. And in doing so, maybe I would finally be seen, not by my family but by the world outside. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving to myself that I was worth something, no matter how invisible they had made me feel. I was awake long before the sun crept over the horizon. The quiet of the early morning was when my mind felt most clear, when the weight of the world was just a faint hum in the background. The world was still. I stood by the window of my small apartment, my thoughts tumbling over one another, each more pressing than the last. The dream I had in mind was big, too big for my small town and certainly too big for me. But as the first light hit the empty streets outside, I knew that I had to start somewhere. Starting small was the only way. With no capital, no backing, and no glamorous business plan, I decided that my first step would be reaching out to the community. I couldn't afford a marketing campaign or a flashy website yet, but I had something even more valuable: relationships. The people in this town had seen me grow up, watched me stumble, and for the most part, they'd ignored my attempts to change. But now I had something to offer them, and I was going to make sure they saw it. My first stop was the local farmer, Mr. Thompson. He was well known in town for his sprawling fields of corn, but even more so for his gruff demeanor. The moment I mentioned the idea of offering farm stays or guided tours, I could see the skepticism wash over his face. His first response was, "Tourists don't come to places like this." He was blunt, as he always was, but I wasn't about to back down so easily. "I know," I said, smiling despite the sting. "But that's exactly why we need to do this. People are looking for something real, something authentic. We've got something beautiful here, something worth sharing." It was a small victory when he finally agreed to let me bring a few tourists to his farm. The first group wasn't large, just 5 people, but the excitement in their faces as they walked through his fields, learning about the harvest, was palpable. I had done it. I had taken the first step. But it didn't stop there. I knew that Mr. Thompson's farm was just the beginning. I needed more. I needed more local faces, more land, more crafts, more stories to tell. I spent the next few weeks knocking on doors, visiting neighbors who I had known my whole life. Some were receptive to the idea right away. Others, like old Mrs. Fisher, were much more hesitant. "Tourists?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she examined me over her glasses. "What good would they do here? They're better off in the city." Her words stung, but I didn't let them deter me. Instead, I told her about the possibilities, how she could teach people how to weave baskets, how to make jam from her garden strawberries, how to show them how she had kept these traditions alive for decades. Slowly but surely, I convinced her to give it a try. The first day she held a small workshop with a few visitors. She was as skeptical as ever, but by the end of the session her doubts had melted away. The tourists loved her stories, her wisdom, and the time spent in her garden. I saw a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't easy, but one by one I built a team, local farmers, artisans, and chefs, who shared the same vision. They saw that this wasn't just about making money. It was about showing the world the soul of our town. It wasn't about making a quick profit. It was about creating something sustainable, something meaningful. Each partnership felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of my dream. I knew from the start that I didn't want this to be just another tourism venture. It had to be different. The idea wasn't to just shuttle people in and out of the town with a quick sightseeing tour. I wanted them to experience something deeper, to leave feeling like they had not only seen the town but had truly connected with it. I spoke to a few chefs in town and asked them to participate. Instead of just serving standard meals, I wanted them to teach visitors how to cook with local ingredients, how to make dishes passed down for generations. The key was immersion. I emphasized that this experience would be personal, authentic. No mass-produced trinkets, no tourist traps. Visitors would engage directly with the people who made this town what it was. They would help harvest crops, participate in local festivals, and learn crafts that had been handed down for generations. It wasn't just about watching, it was about participating. There were days, though, when it felt like the weight of it all might crush me. It wasn't just the logistical hurdles, getting permits, designing itineraries, setting prices, but also the mental exhaustion. I was still working my full-time job, squeezing every free moment I had into planning this business. Every night I would fall into bed exhausted, but I couldn't stop. There were so many details to iron out, so many connections to make. The first few months were a blur. I barely made enough money to cover my expenses, but the guests who did come, fewer than I'd hoped, were so enthusiastic about the experience. They raved about the personal touch, the authenticity of it all. Word of mouth started to spread. Slowly but surely things began to grow. One guest would tell a friend who told another friend, and before I knew it, my small operation was beginning to attract more attention than I had ever imagined. Then came my first major breakthrough. A local food blogger visited the town on a whim. She had heard about my tours and decided to check it out. I'll admit I was nervous. Her blog had a wide readership, and if she didn't like it, I could kiss my chances of growth goodbye. But her visit went better than I could have hoped. She wrote about the town with such warmth, highlighting the people and the experiences they offered. The blog post was shared hundreds of times, bringing in a new wave of tourists. The feeling of recognition, the sense that someone out there saw my hard work, my passion, was indescribable. The visitors who came after that were more engaged, more invested in the idea. They didn't just visit. They became part of our community, even if just for a few days. They shared meals with us, they learned from us, and most importantly, they left with something real. But even as things seemed to be moving forward, the challenges were far from over. The weather was always a factor. There were weeks where rainstorms canceled hikes and made the tours difficult to run. And then there was the constant strain of securing funding. No matter how much I made, it always seemed like there was a shortage. I was constantly in search of new ways to improve the operation, always tweaking and adjusting. But with every setback came a lesson. I had to adapt, to learn how to handle the unexpected. I taught myself everything from marketing to accounting, diving headfirst into every aspect of the business. I wasn't just learning about running a business. I was learning who I was in the process. It wasn't always glamorous. Some days I wondered if I was doing the right thing. The doubts crept in, whispering that maybe this dream wasn't worth it, that maybe I should go back to the life I knew. But then every time a new group of tourists arrived, every time I saw someone light up with excitement over something as simple as fresh produce or a handcrafted bowl, I knew I was on the right path. I was no longer just building a business. I was building a future. One step at a time, one guest at a time, and one partnership at a time. The dream that had seemed so distant was becoming a reality. And with each small victory I felt more and more certain that I could make it work. I had reached a point where doubt was starting to feel like a permanent companion. The excitement of starting something new had worn off, replaced by the harsh realities of running a business. The bookings were slow, the funds were tight, and there were days when I wondered if I had made a mistake. I questioned whether the dream was even possible. Was I just chasing something that would always be out of reach? The weight of responsibility felt heavier every day. I had put everything into this, my time, my energy, my heart. And yet the progress was frustratingly slow. But just as I was about to throw in the towel, something unexpected happened. It was a normal Thursday when I received a message from Mia, a local influencer I had met once at a community event. She'd visited the town a few weeks earlier, had taken part in one of our hiking tours, and had posted a few photos. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a few likes from her followers, nothing more. But Mia had something else in mind. She sent me a direct message, telling me she was going to do a full post about her experience. She was passionate about ecotourism and wanted to share what we were doing here. I was cautiously optimistic. I had heard stories of influencers boosting small businesses, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. A post, no matter how well-intentioned, wasn't a guarantee of success. But Mia's enthusiasm was contagious, and I trusted her. The following week the post went live. I sat at my desk checking my phone with a mix of hope and anxiety. At first there was little activity. A few comments, some likes, but nothing that made my heart race. But then, slowly, the number started to climb. Shares, more comments, questions about availability, and people tagging their friends. Her post, filled with stunning images of the town and our tours, was picking up steam. By the time I went to bed that night, I had a flood of messages in my inbox. Bookings were coming in faster than I could handle. I barely slept, my mind racing with the sudden shift in momentum. I was overwhelmed, exhilarated, and terrified all at once. The phone kept buzzing, and each new message felt like a small victory. People from nearby cities, even from across the state, were reaching out. They wanted to visit the town. They wanted to experience what Mia had shared. It felt surreal, like the tipping point I had been waiting for had finally arrived. The following days were a whirlwind. I scrambled to get everything in order. My small team of local guides wasn't enough to accommodate the surge in visitors. The town, once so quiet, was now buzzing with activity. As the bookings grew, so did the pressure to meet expectations. I found myself needing to expand the tours, add more options, and ensure the same personal touch that had made my business unique. I had to think bigger, faster, and smarter. With the additional income from the increased bookings, I hired more local guides, including some of the farmers I had originally partnered with. They knew the land better than anyone, and their knowledge added an authenticity to the tours that no outsider could replicate. They weren't just employees, they were part of the story. They helped share the rich history of the town and the traditions that had been passed down for generations. The guests loved the personal insights they provided. And every time a visitor walked away with a sense of connection to the place, I knew I had made the right choice. As the months passed, the media began to take notice. The local newspaper ran a feature about the town's growing ecotourism industry, highlighting our business as a key player in the revitalization of rural tourism. It was the exposure I had always hoped for but never expected so soon. The article was picked up by a major national publication, and suddenly the world was paying attention. My business, our business, was no longer just a local operation. It was a model for sustainable tourism, a beacon for what rural communities could achieve by embracing their natural assets. I started to see the results in real time. More tourists arrived, eager to experience the same authentic adventure that had been shared by Mia's followers. It wasn't just about the tours anymore. It was about the story we had crafted together. Our town, once overlooked and forgotten, was now drawing attention from across the country. It felt incredible to see it all unfold, like I was watching the dream I had so desperately clung to finally take shape. But as the business grew, so did the growing pains. The excitement of new opportunities was quickly tempered by the realities of expansion. It was no longer just about me. There were staff to manage, budgets to keep track of, and logistics to handle. I was constantly worried about maintaining the authenticity of the experience while scaling up. The very thing that made our business special, the intimate personal touch, was at risk of being lost in the shuffle. Would we still be able to give guests the close-knit, hands-on experience that they came for? There were moments of doubt when I felt like the business was slipping out of my control. The increasing demand for tours meant more staff, more schedules, more expectations. I started to feel stretched thin. The fear of losing what had made this whole thing so special haunted me. But every time I took a step back and watched a guest's face light up when they harvested their first batch of tomatoes, or when they took their first step into a local artisan's workshop, I knew it was worth it. I had to find a way to grow without compromising the core of what we had built. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This business was no longer just mine to manage. It had become a part of the community, something bigger than myself. I wasn't just offering a service. I was helping to breathe life into the town, giving it a purpose, a reason to be proud again. I began to hire more locals, providing jobs that had once seemed impossible to come by. The farmers, artisans, and shopkeepers who had once been hesitant to embrace tourism now saw how their work was being valued in ways they hadn't imagined. The town's economy was revitalized. People who had struggled for years now had stable work and a sense of pride in what they were offering to visitors. I watched as the people who had once doubted me became some of my biggest supporters, and I realized that this success wasn't just about me, it was about the entire town. As the business grew, so did my own sense of identity. I was no longer the girl with the rusty scooter, the one who had always felt invisible. I was a business owner, a community leader, someone who had transformed her vision into something real. The respect I had always longed for from my family, my friends, and my neighbors was no longer something I needed to chase. It was something I had earned. My quiet revenge was unfolding not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the slow, undeniable rise of my success. The town that had once overlooked me now looked to me as an example of what was possible when someone was determined enough to push past their limits. I wasn't just the girl from the small town anymore. I was someone who had brought it back to life. Someone who had turned a dream into a reality. And as I stood on the edge of what I had created, watching a new group of visitors walk down the street, I realized that the journey had only just begun. There was still so much more to do, so much more to give. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally on the path I was always meant to be on. It was an ordinary morning when I saw them pull up to the town square, my father's car and Linda's sleek vehicle parked side by side. I had no idea they were coming. They'd never shown much interest in my work before, and honestly, I had long stopped hoping they would. But there they were, standing in the doorway of my office like they belonged, as if they had every right to be there to see what I had built. I had to suppress a nervous laugh. This was it, the moment I had secretly been waiting for. I greeted them with a calmness I didn't quite feel. "Hi, Dad. Linda. What brings you to town?" I asked, my voice smooth, but there was a knot in my stomach that refused to unwind. I had been working for years to prove myself not to them but to myself. Yet here they were, at the very heart of what I had accomplished, looking at it with fresh eyes. Linda was the first to speak. Her eyes scanned the bustling town square, where tourists meandered from one artisan stall to another. She looked at the crowds, then at me, her face a mix of confusion and wonder. "Katie, this is incredible," she said almost under her breath, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. There was a hesitation in her voice, but also something new. Something I hadn't heard before: respect. I forced myself not to react too dramatically. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her words meant to me. But inside, a small part of me was smiling. "I'm glad you think so," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's been a lot of work, but it's coming together." Linda looked around again, her gaze lingering on the small shops, the lively farmers, and the smiling tourists. For a moment I thought she might say something dismissive, something that would brush off the months of hard work that had gone into turning this dream into a reality. But then she turned to me, her expression shifting. "You've really turned this place around, haven't you? I had no idea. I didn't realize how big this could get. You've done something remarkable here, Katie. Something I didn't think was possible." Her words weren't perfect, and they weren't as grand as I might have wanted them to be. But they were enough. Linda, who had always brushed off my ambitions with a well-timed eye roll, was now looking at me like I had earned something. The validation I had longed for, no matter how delayed it had been, was finally here. And I wasn't even sure what to do with it. As we walked through the market, I showed them the latest expansion. A new craft station where tourists could learn to weave baskets or try their hand at pottery. The guests were so engaged, smiling as they participated in these simple but meaningful activities. I couldn't help but smile too. Every corner of this place felt like a reflection of the vision I had fought for. But then as we passed by the stall where people were learning to make homemade jam, I noticed something else. A quiet shift happening in Jessica. She had been mostly silent up until that point, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. Watching her closely, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something I wasn't sure I had ever seen before. Was it jealousy? Or was it the realization that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't found the same sense of purpose in her life as I had in mine? Jessica had always been the golden child. She was the one everyone loved, the one who received praise for every little accomplishment. But here in this small town surrounded by my work, she looked like someone adrift in a sea of material wealth. She had always had everything. Money, cars, clothes. But it didn't seem to bring her the same fulfillment it once did. As we walked further, I caught her staring at the tourists, at the people who were genuinely grateful for the chance to experience this town in a way that felt raw, real. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. "I didn't realize you were doing all this for the town," Jessica said quietly as we walked back toward the car. It wasn't a question but a statement. And though she said it casually, I could hear the underlying tone, the shift. She was starting to understand. She had spent her whole life chasing things that glittered on the surface, but I had been building something that mattered. That was real. As we reached the car, Linda turned to me again, this time with a softness I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about everything, Katie, and I regret not seeing what you were capable of. All these years I pushed you aside, always focused on Jessica. But you've proven me wrong. You've proven all of us wrong." I was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Her words were something I'd wanted to hear for years. But now that they were finally here, they didn't have the same sting I had imagined. They felt distant, almost like a long overdue apology. I nodded slowly, not sure what else to say. There was no sense in holding on to the past anymore. My father had been unusually quiet throughout the visit, only speaking when spoken to, and that was rare for him. But as we neared the end of the tour, he caught my arm gently. "Katie," he said softly, his voice low but sincere, I just want to say that I'm proud of you. You've done something none of us expected. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known, and I can't deny it anymore." For the first time in my life, I heard those words from my father. He didn't say them like it was some grand revelation. It wasn't a showy moment. But the sincerity in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't extravagant. Didn't need to be. It was exactly what I had needed. Simple acknowledgement, a quiet recognition of everything I had fought for. That evening as we sat at dinner, I felt a strange sense of closure. The past and all the resentment I had carried around for so long seemed to melt away. My family, who had always been my critics, were finally starting to see me, not just as their daughter but as a person who had carved out her own place in the world. Linda's gaze lingered on me as she picked at her food, her earlier words still hanging in the air. I could tell she was reflecting on everything, the years of favoritism, the dismissive comments, the way she had been so blind to the effort I had put in. And in that silence I could feel her regret. But I didn't need her apology anymore. I had moved past it. I had learned to build my own worth, not from their approval but from my actions, my growth and my success. My victory, quiet as it was complete. I was no longer the overlooked daughter or the girl with the rusty scooty. I was a business owner, a leader, someone who had built something lasting from the ground up. And as I looked at my family, finally seeing the understanding in their eyes, I realized that this victory, this quiet triumph, was more than enough. I didn't need their recognition to feel proud anymore. I had done it on my own, and that was the only validation I needed. The family's realization had come too late for them to fully grasp how much I had achieved, but that didn't matter. I no longer cared about their approval. I had earned my place in the world. And as I stood there, the success of my hard work unfolding before me, I understood what true independence and respect felt like. Earned, not given. As I stood on the balcony of my office, looking out at the now thriving town square, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling in my chest. What started as a simple dream, an idea born out of a quiet longing for something more, had transformed not just my life but the lives of those around me. My business had become the cornerstone of this town's economy. It was no longer a fleeting venture. It was a permanent fixture in the landscape of our community. And with that permanence came a responsibility. A responsibility I didn't take lightly. For years I had been working tirelessly to prove myself not to others, but to the person I saw in the mirror. But now, I realized that my journey wasn't just about my personal success. It was about leaving something behind, a legacy that would live on long after I was gone. The town that had once dismissed me as invisible was now something I had helped revive. It wasn't just about the tourists coming in, or the money flowing through the town's shops. It was about the renewed sense of purpose in the faces of the people who called this place home. As my business grew, so did my vision. I dreamed of expanding even further, not for the sake of profit, but for the sake of the people who had once overlooked me. I wanted to make sure the town wasn't just a brief stop on a tourist map. I wanted it to be a destination, a community where people could come together and experience something real. I had started this journey to build something for myself, but now it was clear. I was building something far more important. Something that would provide jobs, create opportunities, and bring lasting change to the community. I began to think about how I could expand my reach, not just in terms of tourism, but in how I could impact the town's culture and values. I started speaking to local artisans, farmers, and business owners about sustainable practices, urging them to incorporate eco-friendly methods into their work. From composting to water conservation, I encouraged everyone to take steps to ensure that the growth we were experiencing didn't come at the cost of our environment. Sustainability became the backbone of my operation. It wasn't enough to build something successful. I had to build it responsibly. I began planting trees along the town's streets, turning barren plots into green spaces that not only beautified the town but also helped reduce pollution. I worked with local farmers to implement sustainable farming practices, ensuring that the land would remain fertile for generations to come. And as I expanded my business, I incorporated eco-friendly tourism initiatives, making sure that every tour and every interaction with visitors emphasized the importance of protecting the environment. The more I worked to create a sustainable foundation for my business, the more I realized how much it had become part of my identity. I wasn't just the girl who had started a tourism business. I was now the woman who had become an advocate for the environment, someone who had taken her passion for the land and woven it into every aspect of her work. My business wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Along the way I had changed. The girl who had once sought validation from her family, who had spent her life quietly hoping for a moment of recognition, was no longer the same person. I had found purpose not in the eyes of my family, but in the work I had done for the town, for the people who lived here, and for the environment. I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone. The success of my business and the way it had transformed this place was proof enough. I had learned that success wasn't just about the end result. It was about the journey, the lessons learned along the way. And as my business grew, I found myself growing too. I wasn't just building an empire. I was building a life of meaning. The sense of fulfillment that came from seeing people engage with the town, learning from its history and immersing themselves in its culture, was something I had never anticipated. It wasn't just about tourists visiting. It was about creating a space where people could connect to something bigger than themselves. But what struck me most was the way my success had inspired others. In the early days, no one in the town had believed in me. I had been written off as someone who would never amount to much. But now my story was no longer just mine. It had become part of the town's story. Young entrepreneurs who had once doubted their potential were now coming to me for advice. I had become a role model, someone they looked up to for guidance and inspiration. I took these moments seriously. I mentored them, helping them learn the lessons I had learned the hard way, the importance of persistence, the value of hard work, and most importantly, the power of believing in yourself when no one else does. I worked with local students, teaching them about sustainable business practices and encouraging them to dream big. For the first time in my life, I realized that my legacy wasn't just about the business I had built. It was about the next generation. The young people who would take the lessons I had learned and apply them to their own ventures. I watched as new businesses began to sprout up in the town, all grounded in the same principles I had established. A local cafe started sourcing its ingredients from nearby organic farms. A small clothing boutique began using recycled fabrics in its designs. The town was changing, and it wasn't just because of the influx of tourists. It was because of the shift in mindset. People were beginning to realize that they could build something lasting too. But as the town flourished, so did my own personal growth. The insecurities that had once plagued me, the doubts about whether I was good enough, whether I was worthy of success, those faded away. I was no longer the girl who had struggled to be seen. I was the woman who had built something meaningful. I had proved to myself that I was capable of far more than I had ever thought possible. There were times when I would walk through the streets of the town, now buzzing with activity, and reflect on how far I had come. I would see the farmers, the artisans, the shopkeepers, people who had once struggled to make ends meet, now thriving in their own right. And I realized that my success had never been about revenge or about proving something to my family. It had always been about creating something meaningful. Something that would leave an impact long after I was gone. Standing at the helm of my thriving business, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just about money or accolades or recognition. It was about living a life that mattered. A life that had purpose, a life that had meaning. And as I looked around at the community I had helped build, I understood that this was the true legacy. It was the ripple effect of hard work, dedication, and a commitment to something bigger than myself. This was my gift to the town and to myself. In the end, I had come to realize that true success wasn't measured by the number of customers or the amount of profit. It was measured by the impact you had on the world around you. And as I stood in the heart of my town watching it grow and thrive, I knew that my legacy was secure, not in the material things I had accumulated, but in the way I had helped shape the future of this place and the lives of those who called it home.